So let's talk to him right now on the Progressive Guest Line. Jake Asman, host of the Jake Asman Show on YouTube, of course, does great work for ESPN Radio in New York. So Jake, the Jets trade for Reddick in the offseason. They knew this contract situation was brewing. He missed the mandatory minicamp over the summer, which was a $250,000, I guess, fine or money that he left on the table. Either way, at that point, you have to know that he's serious. And now here we are, day one of training camp, and he's a no-show, and there's no solution in sight. So what's the next step for both parties here as the Jets kind of have a brewing problem on their hands?
It kind of feels like the next step is the Jets are willing to kind of call out his bluff a little bit. Like, okay, you're not going to show up? Well, guess what? We're going to find you every day, and we're not going to work out a new deal with you until you show up. At least that was a report from SNY earlier today. You know, this situation is so fascinating, guys, because how often can you remember a player being traded into a contract dispute, right? Typically, you see a player traded that had issues getting a deal done with the current team they were on, a la Brian Burns with the Panthers. He gets traded to the Giants before the deal is consummated. They have a new contract. So it's very rare that this happens. If you kind of read through the tea leaves, it sounds like Reddick told the Jets he was good to play on his current deal. The Jets then leaked out earlier today. They did give him a raise. They did make an offer to increase his $14.5 million salary this year, which is the final year of his contract he had signed previously with Philly. So now it comes down to, okay, what's the compromise here? If the Jets don't want to give him a multi-year extension, can they put more incentives in his deal, give him a pay raise? We just saw the Browns do it about an hour ago, not even, with Amari Cooper. I think that's how this ultimately ends, but maybe it drags on for, a couple more days, maybe a few more weeks, but I'm just not going to panic on July 23rd about Reddick just yet. He's going to be there at some point, and I'm sure he's going to be signed well before week one against the Niners on Monday night.
Well, Jake, they traded for Reddick. They traded a guy in Bryce Huff who they created. Now, maybe I should read the tea leaves here, and it's saying that the Jets maybe don't believe Bryce Huff as good as the production was a year ago, which is why they added a guy in Reddick who's a veteran who's been through it. Now he's 4 years older. But when I look at this from the outside as an unbiased party with the Jets, it's why not pay the guy you know already fits your system who is 4 years younger in Bryce Huff, then trade him over to Philly and bring in Reddick. Can you help me understand the mindset of this deal? If in the end you're going to have to pay Reddick, why wouldn't you have just paid Huff?
Yeah, it's an excellent point. I think their thought process is this. They know Bryce Huff better than anyone, right? He was a UDFA. They didn't draft. Obviously, they signed, they developed. And when it comes to defensive linemen, the one thing you can't question with this Jets coaching staff is they are really good at player development on that side of the ball. John Franklin Myers, another guy, was a waiver claim. They turned him into a really good player. You look at Quinnen Williams, who was good. He became great first-team All-Pro under Robert Saleh and this staff. They drafted Jermaine Johnson. From year one to year two, he went from a rotational player to a Pro Bowler last year. They have Will McDonald, who they drafted in the first round last year. They think he's going to take a step. I think what it came down to was this. They look at Bryce Huff and they think he's a good player. They're in a win now, they're in win now mode, obviously, with this regime, this quarterback at 40 years old. I think Reddick, for at least 1 year, he's a better football player than Bryce Huff. He could close out games for them, and he fits this timeline of this 2-year window they have with Rodgers at quarterback. So I think it simply came down to Reddick makes us better. It only cost us a third-round pick in 2026. We're not going to extend him long-term. We're going to have him for at least this year. If it doesn't work out, we get a comp pick to replace the pick we gave up in the deal anyway. We had Haason Reddick for free, and then we could pay Sauce, we could pay Garrett, we could pay Jermaine. They could start paying their younger players. I think that was the thought process. But at the end of the day, Bryce Huff's a really good player, so they better get it right with Reddick. They need him in camp. He's phenomenal, but they need him to play, and I think at the end of the day they'll get something done.
Jake, I've been a Jets fan since I was 6 years old. Of course, in '98, I was 12 when they were in the AFC title game. It feels like this is as close as they've been to the Super Bowl since that point. Maybe, those early 2000 years with Sanchez, but I didn't really felt like they were contenders those years. They just had a great defense. This feels like a complete team. Can they become more complete if they go out and get a guy like, Devontae Adams? Because Mike Williams already starting the season on the PUP list is not very encouraging. And I'll be honest, I think that's the one weakness I see. If they're a little bit thin at the top of that wide receiver depth chart, anything for you on Devontae Adams maybe in a Jets uniform by the end of the season?
Look, sign me up for Devontae. I think every Jet fan would be crazy to not be on board with that. Look, the Mike Williams thing is interesting, too, right? They say he's on the Breece Hall timeline. Well, Breece Hall didn't start practicing with the Jets coming off his ACL injury until about mid-August. So, these first couple of weeks here of camp, what does his receiver room look like? We know Garrett Wilson's a star, but after that, Allen Lazard, I mean, he was terrible last year. Maybe Rodgers being back could revitalize him a little bit. You have Xavier Gibson, who's going into his second year. He's more of a kind of a gadget slot guy. Malachi Corley was their draft pick they traded up for at the beginning of the third round. They're high on him. But, if you're going to point to an area where the Jets maybe need that move to get them over the top, it would be a player like Devontae. But I think it's twofold. I think if the Jets could get him, I think they would make that move. They're all in to win this year. But where are the Raiders going to be, right? Why would the Raiders, who won 8 games last year, had a winning record with Antonio Pierce as their interim head coach, why would they essentially punt on their season now in July? So I think the Raiders, who I believe, guys, are underdogs in 8 of their first 10 games, if they're 3-6 at the trade deadline and the Jets are 6-3 and they feel like they're a Devontae away from being able to challenge anyone in the conference, Rodgers is healthy, he's playing well, I see the move being made then, but I don't really buy all the rumblings of anything happening between now and the start of the season.
30 seconds here, Jake. Who scares you more, the Bills or the Dolphins in division?
Well, to me, this is easy. I think it's the Bills, right? Josh Allen, best quarterback-driven league. Buffalo's won the division 4 years in a row. Tua can't win a game when the temperature's below 45 degrees. He never has. I think it's Buffalo.
That's the voice of Jake Asman, host of the Jake Asman Show on YouTube. Of course, also does great work for ESPN Radio in the Big Apple. Jake, we appreciate the time, pal.
Guys, thanks for having me. Thanks so much.
Good stuff, bud.
Love
of course,
him.
follow him on social media at Jake Asman.